2 years have passed since the skies over Spira cleared of their ancient terror. 2 years since the eternal calm began, since the cities stopped holding their breath, since children learned to dream of futures that extended beyond the next pilgrimage. The world that emerges from sin's shadow is one struggling to define itself, grasping toward light after a millennium spent in darkness. In this transformed landscape, a young woman who once carried the weight of salvation on her shoulders now searches for something far more personal, something that slipped through her fingers even as she saved the world. This is the story of what comes after happily ever after, of how the ending of one journey becomes the beginning of another, and of how love refuses to accept the boundaries between dream and reality. Besaid Island greets each morning with the same gentle rhythm it has known for generations. Waves crash against volcanic shores, palm trees sway in coastal winds, and the modest village tucked among the greenery stirs to life with the unhurried grace of a place that has learned patience through centuries of hardship. Yet for all its familiar patterns, Besaid carries an undercurrent of change, subtle shifts that mark how profoundly the eternal calm has altered even this remote corner of the world. The temple that once dominated village life stands quieter now, its chambers no longer echoing with prayers to the faith, its purpose uncertain in an age that no longer needs summoners to hold back the darkness. It is here that Yuna lives, the high summoner who brought the eternal calm, though she resists the title with increasing discomfort. The girl who walked the pilgrim's path with quiet determination, who offered herself as sacrifice without hesitation, has become a woman navigating the strange terrain of a world she helped create but struggles to inhabit. She finds herself celebrated everywhere she goes, her name invoked by politicians seeking legitimacy, her endorsement pursued by every faction vying for power in the vacuum left by Yevon's collapse. The adulation feels suffocating, a cage constructed from gratitude and expectation, and Yuna discovers that being a living legend offers little space for simply being herself. The sphere arrives on an ordinary afternoon, carried to Besaid by Kimahri Ronso, the proud guardian who has watched over Yuna since childhood. The recording is ancient, its origins lost to time, discovered somewhere in the frozen peaks of Mount Gagazet, where the Ronso make their home. What it shows seems impossible, a cruel trick of light and memory, a young man confined behind bars in what appears to be Bevelle's underground detention facilities. His features heartbreakingly familiar, despite the context making no sense. He looks directly at the camera with desperate intensity, demanding to see the summoner, his voice carrying an urgency that transcends the centuries separating recording from playback. The resemblance to Tidus is unmistakable, so perfect that Yuna's breath catches in her throat, her hands trembling as she watches the sphere repeat its brief message. Tidus vanished at the conclusion of their journey, dissolved into fireflies as the dream that sustained him faded with the faith's rest. Yuna said goodbye to him on the deck of an airship, watching him fall through her reaching hands, unable to hold on to someone who was never entirely real to begin with. She has carried that loss for 2 years, accepted it with the same quiet grace she brings to all her burdens, understanding that some sacrifices cannot be undone. But this sphere awakens something she thought she had learned to live without, a spark of hope that perhaps the impossible might somehow be possible after all. If this man who looks like Tidus exists somewhere in Spira, if there is any chance he might actually be Tidus through some mechanism she cannot begin to understand, then she must find him. Rikku arrives with perfect timing, her enthusiasm and boundless energy a stark contrast to Yuna's contemplative nature. The owl-bed girl has spent the intervening years watching her cousin retreat further into the role of High Summoner, becoming more icon than person, and she recognizes the danger in that transformation. When she proposes that Yuna join her as a sphere hunter, exploring Spira, in search of ancient recordings that might reveal the world's hidden history, she knows she is offering more than adventure. She is offering escape, freedom from the expectations that threaten to calcify Yuna into a symbol rather than allowing her to remain human. The sphere showing the Tidus look-alike provides the perfect catalyst, a quest that gives purpose to departure without requiring Yuna to articulate her desperate need to discover who she is beyond the title of High Summoner. The Gullwings are formed from this alliance between cousins, though they quickly expand to include others drawn by opportunity or circumstance. Brother, Rikku's excitable sibling, captains their airship Celsius with manic enthusiasm, his infatuation with Yuna adding comedic tension to their dynamic. Buddy handles navigation and technical systems with quiet competence, providing stability when brother's impulsiveness threatens to steer them toward trouble. Shinra, a young Al-Bhed genius whose name will one day carry echoes of corporate empire, tinkers with sphere technology and machina systems, already demonstrating the brilliance that hints at his distant descendants' future. And then there is Paine, the mysterious warrior who joins their crew without explanation, her taciturn demeanor and combat expertise suggesting a past she has no interest in sharing. Paine represents everything Yuna is not: sharp edges where Yuna offers softness, cynicism where Yuna maintains hope, silence where Yuna seeks connection. She wears black leather adorned with belts and buckles, her silver hair and red eyes creating an almost ethereal appearance that seems designed to discourage approach. When questioned about her reasons for joining sphere hunters, she offers only the tersest responses, making clear that her past is territory others enter at their own risk. Yet despite her standoffish nature, something about Paine suggests depth beneath the defensive exterior. Paine carefully guarded against exposure, and Yuna recognizes a kindred soul, even if the specifics remain opaque. The world they set out to explore is one caught between nostalgia and progress, mourning what was lost even as it reaches toward what might be gained. For 1,000 years, the teachings of Yevon provided structure to Spiran society, offering explanation for suffering and purpose in sacrifice. Sin was punishment for humanity's pride in building machina-dependent civilizations, and only through faith and the final summoning could temporary respite be purchased at the cost of a summoner's life. This theology permeated every aspect of existence, shaping how people understood their place in the world and their relationship to forces beyond their control. The revelation of Yevon's corruption, the exposure of its leaders' cynical manipulation, shattered more than a religious institution. It fractured the very foundation upon which Spiran identity had been constructed. Into this ideological vacuum rush, competing visions for Spira's future, each championed by leaders whose personal charisma and factional support create the possibility of civil conflict. The Youth League, headquartered at Mushroom Rock Road, represents those eager to embrace change, to cast off the shackles of tradition that they believe kept Spira imprisoned in cycles of suffering. Led by Mevin Nuge, a battle-scarred veteran whose mechanical arm and haunted eyes speak to personal tragedy, the Youth League demands truth, insisting that Spira's hidden history be brought to light regardless of how uncomfortable those revelations might prove. They reject the gradual approach to reform, arguing that half measures simply preserve the power structures that enabled Yevon's abuses, and they pursue sphere hunting as a means of uncovering the secrets that previous generations conspired to conceal. New Yevon emerges from the remnants of the old order, led by Praetor Baralai, a young man whose calm demeanor and diplomatic skill make him an effective counterweight to Nuge's intensity. Headquartered in Bevelle, the gleaming capital that once served as the seat of Yevon's power, New Yevon argues for measured transformation, acknowledging past wrongs while insisting that wholesale rejection of tradition will leave people adrift without the moral and social frameworks necessary for cohesion. Their motto, "One thing at a time," captures their philosophy of incremental reform, and they position themselves as defenders of those overwhelmed by the pace of change, offering stability in an era when certainty has become precious commodity. Yet, critics see in New Yevon merely a rebranding of the same authoritarian impulses that characterized old Yevon, suspecting that beneath the rhetoric of gradual reform lies a desire to preserve power for those who have always held it. The machine faction, led by the charismatic Al-Bed, named Gipul, represents the third major force shaping Spira's future. Operating out of Jose Temple, which has been converted from place of worship into industrial facility, the machine faction seeks to mainstream machina technology that the Al-Bed have preserved and developed in defiance of Yevon's prohibitions. Gipul, who wears an eye patch and carries himself with the casual confidence of someone comfortable with both charm and combat, argues that embracing machina is not a rejection of Spira's soul, but rather an acceptance of tools that can ease suffering and expand possibility. His faction supplies weapons and equipment to both Youth League and New Yevon, profiting from their rivalry while positioning machina as essential to any vision of the future, a pragmatic approach that makes him simultaneously indispensable and suspect to both sides. These three factions circle each other warily, their tensions simmering beneath a surface of diplomatic niceties, each seeking the endorsement of High Summoner Yuna as a way of legitimizing their vision and delegitimizing their opponents. Yuna herself wants no part in their political maneuvering, recognizing that her support would simply be weaponized in conflicts she has no desire to exacerbate. Her departure from Besaid as a sphere hunter represents, among other things, an escape from the impossible position of being perpetually courted by factions that care less about her actual opinions than about claiming her as symbol. As a sphere hunter, she can be Yuna rather than the High Summoner, at least most of the time, and that freedom alone justifies the choice regardless of whether she ever finds the man from the sphere. Sphere hunting itself has emerged as something between profession and obsession in the era of the eternal calm, with individuals and organizations scouring Spira for ancient recordings that might reveal forgotten history or locate valuable artifacts. The spheres vary wildly in content and importance, some containing mundane documentation of daily life, others holding secrets that could reshape understanding of the past. The Gullwings approach the work with a mixture of sincere curiosity and pragmatic awareness that successful finds can be lucrative, selling their discoveries to collectors or turning them over to factions in exchange for access and resources. They are far from alone in this pursuit, however, and the competition for significant spheres frequently turns contentious as rival groups race to claim discoveries before others can secure them. The LeBlanc Syndicate represents the Gullwings' primary competition, a colourful organisation led by the flamboyant LeBlanc, whose theatrical personality and dramatic flair mask surprising competence and genuine charisma. LeBlanc herself cuts an striking figure, her revealing costume and elaborate makeup creating an impression of frivolity that proves deceptive when one observes her actually operating. She commands fierce loyalty from her subordinates, a collection of misfits and outcasts who have found purpose and belonging under her leadership, and she pursues sphere hunting with the intensity of someone for whom the mission carries personal significance beyond mere profit. Her two primary lieutenants, Logos and Ormi, provide contrasting styles of support. Logos, tall and cunning, serves as the brains of operations, his strategic thinking and information-gathering skills making him invaluable for planning complex operations. Ormi, short and stout but surprisingly strong, brings raw power and loyal devotion, his simple nature making him easy to underestimate and therefore often more effective than opponents expect. The first encounter between Gullwings and LeBlanc's syndicate occurs in Luca, the cosmopolitan port city that serves as Spira's commercial and entertainment hub. The syndicate has stolen one of Yuna's garment grids, the devices that enable sphere hunters to access the combat capabilities recorded in dress spheres, ancient crystallized memories that grant their wearers specific skills and abilities. LeBlanc intends to impersonate Yuna, capitalizing on the High Summoner's fame by performing a concert under her identity, cashing in on reputation she has not earned, while simultaneously tarnishing Yuna's image through association with her own questionable character. The audacity of the scheme is matched only by its poor execution, as Rikku and Paine immediately recognize the imposter and crash the concert, demanding return of their property. The confrontation that follows introduces combat dynamics that will characterize the entire journey. Unlike the previous adventure's methodical approach to battles, where each character maintained fixed roles and capabilities, the dress sphere system allows for fluid adaptation during fights, with Yuna and her companions switching between combat styles to counter specific threats or exploit enemy weaknesses. Yuna's default gunner dress sphere grants ranged attack capabilities, a stark departure from the summoner role that defined her previous journey. Rikku operates as thief, her speed and versatility making her ideal for both offense and support, while Paine defaults to warrior, her physical strength and durability anchoring the team's front line. But these roles shift constantly as tactical situations evolve, with characters sphere changing mid-battle to access healing magic, devastating special attacks, or defensive capabilities as circumstances require. LeBlanc and her lieutenants prove more capable than their comical presentation suggests, Logos's trick shots and Ormi's surprising strength making them legitimate threats despite the battle's ultimate outcome favoring the Gullwings. As the syndicate flees defeat, LeBlanc makes dramatic proclamations about future encounters, her theatrical exit suggesting this conflict is far from resolved. The retrieved garment grid and successful disruption of the impersonation scheme count as victories, yet something about the encounter leaves Yuna thoughtful. LeBlanc's obvious devotion to her cause, her subordinates' fierce loyalty, the genuine camaraderie visible beneath their bickering. All of it suggests that reducing them to simple antagonists would be a mistake. Whatever drives LeBlanc to sphere hunting involves something deeper than mere profit, though what that might be remains mysterious. The journey continues across Spira's diverse landscapes, each location offering glimpses of how regions are adapting to the eternal calm in their own ways. Kilika, devastated by sin years ago and rebuilt since, finds itself at the center of factional tensions when an awesome sphere is discovered during reconstruction efforts. Both Youth League and New Yevon converge on the location, each claiming rightful ownership and threatening to escalate their cold rivalry into actual violence. The Gullwings arrive amid this standoff, and through combination of stealth and timing, they manage to claim the sphere before either faction can secure it, absconding with their prize while leaving both sides furious at being outmaneuvered. the stolen sphere contains disturbing content that transforms their understanding of the stakes involved. The recording shows underground chambers beneath Bevelle, massive spaces carved from bedrock and filled with ancient machina of staggering scale. At the center of this subterranean complex rests Vegnagun, a weapon system so powerful that its potential for destruction makes every other consideration insignificant by comparison. The sphere provides only fragmentary information about Vegnagun's capabilities, but what is shown suggests the machina was designed to fight sin itself, a weapon of such overwhelming force that it could theoretically destroy the ancient terror that plagued Spira for a millennium. Yet despite possessing such power, Vegnagun was never deployed, sealed away instead in Bevelle's deepest vaults, suggesting that those who created it recognized its potential for catastrophe exceeded even the threat it was meant to counter. The sphere also provides the clearest image yet of the man who resembles Titus, showing him in the same Bevelle detention facilities, speaking with urgency about someone named Lenny. The name means nothing to Yuna, yet it triggers complex emotions she cannot quite identify, stirring something beneath conscious awareness that feels simultaneously foreign and intimately familiar. That night, after celebrating their successful sphere acquisition with a concert where Yuna performs in the songstress dress sphere, she finds herself inexplicably angry, demanding to know who Lena is with an intensity that surprises even herself. She storms to bed still, agitated, and her dreams that night prove disturbing. Vivid scenes of herself and Titus trapped in underground passages, guards surrounding them, gunfire echoing through stone corridors, and the massive bulk of Vegnagun looming in the darkness. She wakes disoriented and disturbed, and Rikku suggests that wearing the songstress dress sphere while sleeping might have caused the strange visions, though the explanation feels incomplete, even as Yuna accepts it. The awesome sphere must be returned to either Youth League or New Yevon, a choice that will define the Gullwings' relationship with both factions for the remainder of their journey. Yuna agonizes over the decision, recognizing that whoever receives the sphere gains significant political advantage, while the snubbed faction will view the Gullwings as enemies. The sphere's contents are too important to simply withhold, as knowledge of Vegnagun's existence beneath Bevelle changes everything about Spira's political landscape. After much deliberation, Yuna makes her choice, and that decision ripples outward in ways both immediate and long-lasting. The faction that receives the sphere welcomes the Gullwings as allies, granting them access to resources and information, while the rejected faction treats them with hostility, doors closing and cooperation evaporating in the face of perceived betrayal. Regardless of which faction Yuna favors, both recognize the threat Vegnagun represents, and tensions escalate as each side accuses the other of planning to seize the weapon for their own purposes. The Gullwings find themselves drawn deeper into political maneuvering they have no desire to navigate, their search for the Titus lookalike increasingly entangled with larger forces beyond their control. Meanwhile, LeBlanc and her syndicate have not been idle, and they stage a daring raid on the Celsius while the Gullwings are away, infiltrating the airship and stealing a broken sphere that the crew had recovered from Xanarkan ruins. The theft is discovered too late to prevent, and the realization that LeBlanc now possesses half of a sphere that might contain crucial information drives home how precarious the Gullwings' position has become. The decision to infiltrate Chateau LeBlanc, the Syndicate's headquarters in Guadesalam, emerges from pragmatic necessity rather than desire for confrontation. The Gullwings need that sphere half back, and they need to know what LeBlanc has learned from her portion of the recording. But penetrating the syndicate's stronghold requires subterfuge rather than direct assault, which leads to the surreal mission of acquiring LeBlanc's syndicate uniforms and attempting to pass themselves off as members of her organization. The comedy of watching Yuna, Rikku and Paine don the syndicate's distinctive costumes and awkwardly attempt to blend in among LeBlanc's legitimate followers provides levity, yet underneath the humor runs genuine tension. They are walking into hostile territory with minimal preparation, and discovery would leave them vulnerable to a force that has already proven capable of penetrating their own defenses. Chateau Leblanc itself reflects its owner's personality. The repurposed Guado Manor decorated in shades of pink and purple, ornate furnishings competing for space with Machina equipment and sphere analysis technology. The Gullwings navigate its corridors with held breath, bluffing their way past questioning syndicate members until they reach what might be the operation's most absurd challenge. Leblanc, relaxing in her private chambers, demands a massage from the disguised intruders, and what follows is a minigame of attempting to satisfy her expectations while maintaining their cover. The experience is simultaneously humiliating and darkly hilarious, a reminder that adventures do not always take the dramatic forms one might anticipate. With their cover eventually blown, the Gullwings abandon subterfuge for direct confrontation, fighting through LeBlanc's underground maze of a headquarters, discovering along the way that the Syndicate has indeed reconstructed the Xanarcan sphere by combining both halves. The restored recording shows Vegnagun in greater detail, reveals more about the man who resembles Tidus and his desperate quest to reach someone named Lene, and most importantly, demonstrates that Leblanc has been operating with more complete information than the Gullwings possessed. When final confrontation comes, when Leblanc, Logos, and Ormi stand together against Yuna's team, the battle feels almost perfunctory. Tension already diffused by mutual recognition of larger stakes. After their defeat, Leblanc does something unexpected. Rather than rage against her loss or swear vengeance, she allows the Gullwings full access to the restored sphere, explaining her reasons for sphere hunting with surprising vulnerability. Everything she has done, every scheme and theft and theatrical performance, has been in service of one goal: to gain the attention and affection of Mevnagun, leader of the Youth League. Leblanc has carried feelings for Nuge that she has never been able to express directly, and she believes that if she can present him with some revelation from Spira's hidden past, something significant enough to advance his mission of uncovering truth, he might finally see her as someone worthy of his regard. The confession transforms Leblanc from antagonist to sympathetic figure, her buffoonery recontextualized as the desperate actions of someone driven by unrequited love to ever more elaborate attempts at earning notice. The restored Xanarcan sphere reveals that Vegnagun is no longer beneath Bevelle. The weapon has somehow activated and relocated itself, leaving behind only the massive tunnel it carved through bedrock as it descended toward the far plane, the realm of the dead that exists at Spira's spiritual core. This revelation elevates the crisis from theoretical to immediate. Vegnagun possesses enough destructive power to potentially obliterate all of Spira, and it is now in motion, heading toward a location where conventional intervention might prove impossible. The factional tensions that have consumed so much attention suddenly seem petty in the face of existential threat, and unlikely alliances begin to form out of shared recognition that internecine conflicts mean nothing if no one survives to see their resolution. The Gullwings and LeBlanc Syndicate forge a truce, their rivalry set aside in favor of cooperation against the looming catastrophe. they organize a joint expedition to explore Bevelle underground, the vast complex of chambers and passages that honeycombs the earth beneath the capital city. The descent reveals layer upon layer of ancient history, evidence of civilizations that predated Yevon by centuries or millennia, machina technology that suggests levels of sophistication far exceeding contemporary understanding. The scale of the underground installation speaks to resources and capabilities that modern Spira cannot match, reminding explorers that the current era represents civilizational decline rather than progress. That knowledge and capacity have been lost rather than gained over the long centuries of Yevon's dominance. They reach the chamber where Vegnagun once rested, now empty save for the tunnel leading downward, and the sight inspires equal parts awe and terror. The weapon carved through solid rock as if it were mere dirt, leaving behind smooth walls that suggest controlled disintegration rather than crude boring. Following the tunnel would require descending into depths where few have ventured and fewer have returned, where the boundary between physical and spiritual grows thin, and the normal rules of reality cease to apply with full force. The expedition retreats to process what they have discovered, and as they review sphere recordings made during the exploration, someone notices a figure in the background of one recording. Nuge, moving through the underground complex alone, his presence unexplained and deeply suspicious. The political situation deteriorates rapidly as the three faction leaders, Nuge, Baralai, and Gipol, simultaneously disappear from their posts without explanation or warning. Their absence creates vacuum that threatens to collapse into chaos, as subordinates maneuver for position and long-suppressed tensions surge toward the surface. The Youth League and New Yevon inch closer to open warfare, each convinced the other has kidnapped their leader as prelude to coup, while the machine faction struggles to maintain its neutral position as pressure mounts from both sides. Yuna finds herself thrust into role of mediator despite her protests, her status as High Summoner making her one of few figures both factions might still trust to negotiate in good faith, though she possesses neither the desire nor the skills for such delicate diplomacy. The mystery of what connects these three men, why their disappearances coincide, and what their relationship to Vegnagun might be, cannot be solved without understanding the past they share. That past is recorded in fragments scattered across Spira in the form of crimson spheres, specialized recordings made during the formation of an elite military unit, known as the Crimson Squad 2 years prior, during the events of the previous crisis. Collecting these spheres becomes priority, each one revealing another piece of a puzzle that grows darker with each revelation. The recordings show 4 young candidates during their training. Nuge, battle-scarred even then. Baralai, earnest and idealistic despite his Yevonite background. Gipol, the charming Albed, who brought levity to their group. And Paine, younger and more open than the woman the Gullwings know, serving as recorder for the squad's activities. The Crimson Spheres document camaraderie forged under pressure, showing these 4 individuals from wildly different backgrounds forming genuine bonds as they face challenges together. Nuge's death wish, barely concealed beneath his competence, surfaces in several recordings, and Paine saves his life when he attempts to walk unarmed into a fiend's path. They share jokes and dreams, speculate about their futures, support each other through moments of doubt and fear. Watching these recordings, understanding the friendship that once existed between these 4, makes their current fractured state all the more tragic. Something happened to break their bonds, something so profound that it transformed trusted companions into strangers who can barely stand to be in the same room together. The final training mission takes the Crimson Squad candidates to the Den of Woe, a cave system beneath Mushroom Rock Road that has acquired sinister reputation for driving visitors mad with inexplicable visions. The den was actually the true purpose of the Crimson Squad program, Meister Kinnock having assembled the unit specifically to explore this location in hopes of understanding the mysterious force that inhabits it. The candidates enter the cave with confidence born of their training and mutual trust, but what they encounter inside shatters both. The den swarms with fireflies, the energy particles that compose all life in Spira. But these fireflies are corrupted, carrying within them the anguished emotions of someone who died in terrible circumstances and never found peace. The despair and hatred saturating the den overwhelms the candidates, turning them against each other in frenzy of violence that leaves most of them dead. Only Nuge, Baralai, Gipol, and Paine escape the massacre, though their survival comes at cost that becomes clear only later. The malevolent presence in the den, a spirit named Shuyin, who has haunted those passages for 1,000 years, possessed Nuge during the chaos, using his body as vessel to escape the cave's confines. The 4 survivors report to their Yevonite supervisors, describing what they witnessed and asking for guidance, only to have their superiors order their immediate execution. The Crimson Squad program was never meant to produce military leaders. It was cover for investigating the den. And now that the investigation has failed spectacularly, those who know about it represent embarrassing liability. Paine's warning allows them to flee the execution attempt, and they agree to separate, scattering across Spira to avoid recapture. But as they say their goodbyes on the Ian High Road, standing near Rin's travel agency and making plans to reunite once the danger has passed, tragedy strikes. Nuge, still possessed by Shuyin though none of them realize it, draws his weapon and opens fire on his companions. Baralai takes a shot to the shoulder, Gipal to the chest, and when Paine turns to see what is happening, Nuge shoots her as well, the blast destroying her sphere recorder, even as it captures his attack. They all survive the shooting, but the betrayal shatters their friendship absolutely. For 2 years, Nuge, Baralai, and Gipal have avoided each other, unable to reconcile the companion they trusted with the man who tried to murder them, while Paine joined the Gullwings, hoping to find answers about what destroyed the best thing she had ever found in her life. Understanding this history recontextualizes everything about the current crisis. Shuyin, the spirit who possessed Nuge, has been manipulating events for 2 years, using his host to position himself to eventually seize control of Vegnagun and execute the plan he failed to complete a millennium ago. The 3 faction leaders have disappeared because Shuyin has escalated his efforts, abandoning Nuge's compromised body for the easier target of Baralai, using the Praetor of New Yevon to access Vegnagun and follow it into the far plane. Nuge and Gipal pursue their possessed friend, attempting to stop him before he can activate the weapon. But they recognize they cannot succeed alone. They need help from someone who can navigate both the physical and spiritual challenges the far plane presents. Someone with the courage and capability to face the darkness Shuyin represents. That someone, inevitably, is Yuna. During a mission to pacify fiends emerging from former temples, whose faith have departed, leaving behind chambers that now serve as conduits for spiritual energy, Yuna falls through the opening where Josei Temple's faith statue once rested. She plummets into the far plane itself, emerging in that realm between life and death to find herself inexplicably wearing the songstress dress sphere. The transformation happens without her conscious choice, and when Baralai approaches her, possessed by Shuyin, the spirit's perception shifts. He sees not Yuna but Lene, the woman he loved 1,000 years ago, the one whose death drove him to become the vengeful presence that has haunted Spira ever since. Shuyin's confusion is profound and desperate, his grief so raw that it transcends the millennium separating his death from this moment. He speaks to Yuna as if she were Lene, describing waking after dying to find himself alone, unable to locate the one person whose presence made existence bearable. He has searched for her across centuries, convinced she must be somewhere in the far plane, even as he finds no trace of her essence among the departed. His desperation has curdled into rage at a world that took her from him, that forced them into circumstances where love became synonymous with loss. And he has decided that if he cannot have her, if Spira's endless conflicts have cost him everything worth preserving, then the whole world deserves to share his pain. He will activate Vegnagun, will use its catastrophic power to destroy all of Spira, ending the possibility of future wars by ensuring there are no future generations to perpetuate the cycle of violence. The encounter leaves Yuna shaken. The emotions she feels while Shuyin addresses her, carrying an intensity that suggests they originate somewhere beyond her own consciousness. She experiences affection for him that makes no sense, recognition of someone she should not recognize, and when he departs deeper into the far plane, she finds herself struggling against the urge to follow. Nuj and Gipul arrive to provide context, explaining their pursuit of Baralai and requesting that Yuna handle surface matters, while they continue chasing Shuyin into depths only they can navigate. Yuna agrees, though escaping the far plane proves unexpectedly difficult until she hears a familiar sound. A whistle, the same pattern Tidus taught her long ago, echoing through the spiritual realm and guiding her back toward the physical world. The mystery of why Shuyin mistakes Yuna for Lene, why the songstress dress sphere triggers such profound reactions in both Yuna and the ancient spirit, demands investigation. The answer lies in the dress sphere's origins, in understanding what these crystallized memories actually contain. Each dress sphere preserves not just combat techniques, but fragments of the person who originally performed those actions, residual consciousness embedded in the recording that influences the wearer in subtle ways. The songstress dress sphere, it transpires, contains memories of Lena herself, a summoner who lived 1,000 years ago during Zanakan's war with Bevelle, and whose story with Shuyin parallels Yuna's own relationship with Tidus in ways that make their connection feel predestined rather than coincidental. Lena was a songstress and summoner during Zanakan's final desperate years, when the city-state fought for survival against Bevelle's relentless military campaigns. She performed to boost morale even as the war ground lives into dust, her voice carrying hope to soldiers who knew they faced almost certain death. Shuyin was a blitzball star, Zanakan's champion athlete, who commanded adoration from crowds that filled the massive stadium to watch him play. Their romance blossomed against the backdrop of apocalyptic warfare, love flourishing in the spaces between battles, made more precious by its fragility. They knew their time was limited, that the war's trajectory pointed toward only one conclusion, but they stole what happiness they could from moments that could not last. As Bevelle's forces closed around Zanakan, as defeat became inevitable, Shuyin made a desperate decision. Bevelle had constructed Vegnagun as their ultimate weapon, a machina capable of unleashing destruction on scales that defied comprehension. If Zanakan was going to fall, if his city and everyone he loved were going to be obliterated, then he would steal Vegnagun first, turn Bevelle's weapon against them in an act of vengeance that would at least ensure both sides shared destruction. He infiltrated Bevelle's underground complex, fought his way past guards whose bodies now litter the detention areas visible in the spheres the Gullwings discovered, and reached the chamber where Vegnagun waited. But he failed to activate it before Bevelle's forces cornered him, failed to complete the plan that would have murdered millions in the name of preventing his own city's annihilation. Lena discovered what Shuyin had attempted and raced to stop him, recognizing that even if he succeeded, even if he managed to activate Vegnagun and destroy Bevelle, the retaliation would simply accelerate Zanarkand's destruction while adding countless more casualties to the war's already staggering toll. She reached him in the detention area, pleaded with him to abandon the plan, to flee with her and find some way to survive together, even if their city fell. The exchange was recorded by Bevelle's sphere technology, capturing their final moments together as guards surrounded them. Shuyin held Lena as bullets tore through both their bodies, the couple dying in each other's arms, and his last thoughts before darkness claimed him were of finding her again somehow, of ensuring death would not separate them permanently. But death did separate them absolutely. Lene's spirit departed to whatever lies beyond the mortal realm, her consciousness released to whatever peace the dead find when they fully let go. She was not preserved as a faith, did not join the great summoning that would later transform Zanarkand into an eternal dream. She simply died, and her essence moved beyond the far plane's boundaries into spaces the living cannot reach or comprehend. For 1,000 years she remained truly gone, at peace in ways that Shuyin would never achieve. Shuyin's fate proved far darker. His spirit, twisted by anguish and rage, became trapped in the den of woe, unable to move forward and unwilling to release his hatred of a world that murdered him and took Lena away. For 1,000 years he festered in those caves, his corrupted consciousness poisoning the fireflies that drifted through the den until the location became dangerous to anyone who entered. When Nuge and the Gyaj, other Crimson Squad candidates, explored the caves, Shuyin finally found opportunity to escape, possessing Nuge and using his body to eventually position himself to seize Vegnagun. He never knew that Lena became a faith, never understood that she had been present in the world all along, but in a form he could not perceive, and by the time he achieved freedom from the den, she had already departed beyond his reach. The songstress dress sphere carries Lene's memories and fragments of her consciousness, preserved in crystallized form when her identity as summoner and performer was recorded long ago. When Yuna wears it, when she channels those memories and allows Lene's essence to influence her movements and emotions, she becomes conduit for the woman Shuyin loved. The resemblance between Yuna and Lena goes deeper than physical similarity, touching on shared qualities of compassion and selflessness, the willingness to sacrifice personal happiness for others' welfare. Shuyin's confusion when confronting Yuna is both understandable and tragic, his damaged psyche unable to distinguish between the woman he loved and the one who carries her memories, desperate to believe he has finally found her, even as some part of him recognizes the impossibility. Understanding this history transforms the crisis from political problem into deeply personal tragedy, playing out across centuries. Shuyin is not villain in the traditional sense, but rather victim who has become victimizer, someone whose capacity for love mutated into engine of destruction when that love was taken from him. He genuinely believes that activating Vegnagun will end suffering by ending existence, that a world which produces such anguish deserves annihilation, and he cannot comprehend that the cycle of violence he seeks to conclude with ultimate violence would simply crown the atrocities of the past with one final unforgivable act. Stopping him requires not just defeating him, but somehow reaching the person beneath the corruption, finding whatever remains of the man Lene loved, and helping him recognize that vengeance will not restore what he lost. The decision is made to hold a concert at the Thunder Plains, broadcasting across all of Spira through Sphere technology, with Yuna performing as songstress in an attempt to draw Shuyin out one final time. The plan is risky, bordering on reckless, banking on the theory that Lene's voice emanating from Yuna might penetrate Shuyin's madness, enough to create an opening for dialogue or intervention. The entire venture feels desperate, a Hail Mary from people who recognize they have no better options and no more time to develop alternatives. Vegnagun continues descending toward the far plane's core, each passing hour bringing it closer to the position from which it could unleash its catastrophic power, and conventional military force means nothing against a weapon that exists partially outside physical reality. The concert itself becomes something more than mere performance. Yuna takes the stage with Rikku and Paine flanking her, thousands of Spirans watching through spheres transmitted across the world, and begins to sing 1,000 words, a song that Lene once performed for Zanarkand's defenders. The music carries emotional weight that transcends the lyrics, Lene's memories flowing through Yuna and infusing the performance with centuries of longing and sorrow. As she sings, as her voice echoes across continents and through the boundaries between physical and spiritual, something extraordinary happens. The songstress dress sphere blazes with light, Lene's consciousness surging forward more strongly than ever before, and for a moment the distinction between Yuna and the ancient summoner blurs almost completely. Shuyin appears in the crowd, or appears to appear, his form flickering between solidity and transparency, drawn by the voice of the woman he has sought for a millennium. He watches the performance with an expression that cycles through hope, confusion, despair, and rage, unable to reconcile what he hears with what he knows, wanting desperately to believe this is Lene, while recognizing at some level that it cannot be. The concert reaches its crescendo, Yuna pouring everything into the final verses, and then Shuyin vanishes again, retreating back toward the far plane and Vegnagun, the bait taken, but the trap not yet sprung. The performance has served its purpose, however, confirming that Lene's presence affects him profoundly, and providing the foundation for whatever final confrontation awaits in the depths where he has taken refuge. The Gullwings, now joined by the former Crimson Squad members and even LeBlanc's syndicate, prepare for descent into the far plane itself. The mission is unprecedented in scope, requiring them to navigate a realm where the normal rules of existence do not fully apply, where the dead walk and time flows differently, where reality bends around concentrated belief and emotion. The far plane has always been a place of pilgrimage for Spirans seeking to commune with departed loved ones, its entrance at Guadosalam allowing brief glimpses of those who have passed beyond. But the depths, the regions beyond the viewing platforms where tourists pay their respects, remain largely unexplored, considered too dangerous for casual visitation and too sacred for exploitation. Descending through the far plane's layers reveals the true nature of Spira's spiritual geography. The realm is not simply a separate dimension, but rather the planet's collected memory and consciousness, the repository where all life returns after death, and from which new life eventually emerges. Fireflies, the glowing particles that appear at death, are the visible manifestation of this cycle, consciousness and energy returning to the collective to eventually be reborn in new forms. The far plane is where these fireflies congregate most densely, creating an environment where the boundary between Individual and collective consciousness grows permeable, where identities blur and merge in ways that living beings find profoundly disorienting. The tunnel Vegnagun carved provides a path deeper than most have ever ventured, descending through layers of memory and experience that predate contemporary civilization by millennia. They pass through regions where the architecture of ancient Zanarkand manifests from collective memory. Phantom buildings constructed from the shared recollections of everyone who once lived there. They navigate spaces where the memories of dead warriors replay their final battles endlessly, combat frozen in eternal repetition. They traverse passages where the weight of sorrow accumulated over generations presses down with almost physical force. Areas where the far plane has absorbed so much grief that the emotional residue becomes environmental hazard. Throughout the descent, they encounter projections and echoes, images of people who have passed beyond, summoned forth by the far plane's interaction with the living visitor's memories. Yuna sees glimpses of faces she lost during the pilgrimage, companions who fell so she could continue forward, guardians who sacrificed themselves that she might survive. Each encounter is brief but wrenching, reminders of cost paid to reach this point, of the debts she can never fully repay. The others experience similar visitations, the far plane holding up mirrors that reflect their regrets and losses, forcing them to confront the ghosts they carry even before engaging the literal spirit they have come to face. The deeper they descend, the more they begin encountering pieces of Vegnagun itself, the massive weapon having disassembled into component sections that move independently toward a common destination. Each component is formidable in its own right. Mobile machina fortresses armed with devastating weaponry that would challenge even seasoned sphere hunters under normal circumstances. Fighting through these preliminary encounters drains resources and energy, wearing them down before the truly significant confrontation has even begun. The weapon's design reveals intelligence that predates modern understanding, systems that blend machina engineering with something approaching biological adaptability, technology that has waited 1,000 years in dormancy and awakened with capabilities intact. They reach the far plane's core to find Vegnagun assembling itself, its components converging and integrating into the configuration designed for maximum destructive potential. The weapon is massive beyond easy comprehension, its central chamber large enough to hold buildings, its armaments capable of targeting anything within the weapon's considerable range. The machina demonstrates sophistication that suggests intelligence woven into its design, systems that have waited 1,000 years in dormancy and awakened with capabilities intact, able to move independently and respond to threats with what appears to be strategic awareness. And atop this mountain of destructive technology, possessed Bevelle stands as Shuyin's vessel, the ancient spirit piloting this borrowed body toward the activation sequence that will reduce Spira to ash and memory. The confrontation that follows operates on multiple levels simultaneously, Yuna and her companions battling Vegnagun's automated defenses while trying to reach Shuyin before he can complete his genocidal intention. The fight with Vegnagun itself tests everything they have learned across their journey, requiring perfect coordination and adaptation as the weapon cycles through attack patterns that would obliterate any single combatant. They attack its propulsion systems, its targeting arrays, the conduits that channel power to its weapons, systematically dismantling the components that allow it to function. But even as they degrade Vegnagun's capabilities, even as they force the weapon into increasingly damaged states, Shuyin continues his work, fingers dancing across ancient control interfaces that respond to his will, countdowns initiating that signal the weapon's impending discharge. Time becomes enemy as much as the machina they fight, each passing second bringing them closer to failure regardless of how much damage they inflict. Breaking through to Shuyin requires overwhelming Vegnagun's final defenses, and when they finally stand before him, when Baralai's possessed form turns to face them with eyes that belong to someone else, the confrontation shifts from physical combat to something more desperate. Yuna steps forward, wearing the songstress dress sphere, channeling Lenny's presence as strongly as she can manage, and Shuyin hesitates. His hand hovers over the final activation command, his expression torn between determination and confusion. And in that moment of uncertainty, something extraordinary occurs. The songstress dress sphere shatters, its crystallized memories reaching a threshold where containment becomes impossible. And Len's essence manifests in visible form for the first time in 1,000 years. She appears as she was in life, young and beautiful, wearing the costume of a Zanarkan summoner, her presence radiating the compassion that defined her even in death. Whether this manifestation represents Lenny's actual consciousness, called forth from beyond death, or merely the dress sphere's accumulated memories achieving critical density through Yuna's channeling, remains ambiguous, but the effect on Shuyin proves unmistakable. She speaks to him directly, her voice carrying across the millennium that separates their deaths, addressing the man she loved with all the tenderness that time has been unable to diminish. She tells him that she understands his pain, that she shared his anguish during their final moments together, that the injustice of their deaths and the cruelty of the war that killed them deserved all the rage he has carried. But she also tells him that what he plans, the destruction he seeks to inflict, would accomplish nothing except multiplying the very suffering that destroyed them. Activating Vegnagun would murder millions of innocent people who had no part in the war that killed them, would visit upon future generations the same violence and loss that made their own deaths so tragic. It would make their love, which was the best thing either of them ever found, into the foundation for atrocity beyond measure. And it would mean that 1,000 years of clinging to anger and grief, a millennium of refusing to let go, would culminate in an act that transforms him from victim into the very monster he believed their enemies to be. Lenny's words cut through Shuyin's madness more effectively than any weapon could, her presence achieving what violence and reason could not. He stares at her with an expression that cycles through disbelief, relief, joy, and finally crushing sorrow, as he understands what he has become during the centuries they spent separated. He sees himself through her eyes and recognizes a stranger, someone who took the love they shared and perverted it into excuse for genocide, who confused destruction with justice and convinced himself that if he could not have happiness, then no one deserved the possibility. His hands fall away from Vegnagun's controls, his body sagging as if strings have been cut, and he begins to weep with the grief of someone who has carried unbearable weight for far too long. Baralai's body collapses as Shuyin releases his hold, the spirit's consciousness separating from its host and manifesting independently for the first time since his death. He appears as he was before the bullets tore through him, young and handsome, bearing the face that made crowds cheer and Lena smile. He reaches for her across the space that separates them, and she meets him halfway, their hands touching despite both being long dead, spirits meeting in the realm between life and whatever lies beyond. They speak quietly, words meant only for each other, acknowledging the love that survived despite everything and the necessity of finally letting go. 1,000 years is long enough to carry grief. It is time, past time, to accept what cannot be changed and move forward into whatever peace the dead can find. The fireflies that compose their spiritual forms begin to dissipate, their time in this world finally reaching its end. Lena and Shuyin embrace one final time, holding each other as they fade, and in their last moments visible to the living, they smile with an expression of relief and completion. They vanish into light that rises toward the far plains heights, released from the cycle that bound them and the suffering that defined their existence, finally free to rest or be reborn or simply cease, whichever fate awaits those who fully let go. The Gullwings watch in silence, bearing witness to a love story's ending a millennium after its tragic beginning. And Yuna finds tears streaming down her face for two people she never knew, but somehow understands more intimately than almost anyone. Whether what appears is truly Lena's consciousness returned, or merely an echo triggered by the songstress dress sphere channeling her memories, through Yuna remains uncertain, but the effect proves undeniable regardless of the mechanism. Vegnagun, deprived of the will that animated it, powers down into dormancy once more. The weapon remains dangerous, its existence a testament to humanity's capacity for creating instruments of annihilation. But without Shuyin's driving hatred to direct it, the machina poses no immediate threat. The crisis has been resolved not through violence, but through love's power to reach across death and time, through one person's willingness to speak truth that another desperately needed to hear. The victory feels different from typical heroic triumphs, quieter and more bittersweet. The saving of the world accomplished through helping two souls finally find peace, rather than through defeating evil in conventional combat. The return to Spira's surface brings them back to a world poised on the edge of transformation. The three faction leaders, reunited after their ordeal in the far plane and the revelation of how Shuyin manipulated them all, must now determine what comes next for a planet that has narrowly avoided destruction. The animosity that drove wedges between Nuj, Baralai, and Gipple has not vanished, but the shared experience of pursuing Shuyin into the depths, of witnessing firsthand the consequences of letting hatred fester unchecked, has given them new perspective on their own conflicts. They stand together before crowds gathered in Luca, and in speeches that are broadcast across Spira, they announce the dissolution of the Youth League and New Yevon as opposing factions. The new political structure they propose is one built on cooperation rather than competition, recognition that Spira's challenges require collaboration across ideological lines rather than winner-take-all contests for dominance. The machine faction will help integrate machina technology into daily life in ways that respect tradition while expanding capability. New Yevon will focus on preserving the cultural and spiritual heritage that gives Spiran identity continuity across generations. The Youth League will continue pursuing truth about the past, while working to ensure that historical revelations serve the living, rather than simply settling old scores. It is an ambitious framework, one that will require sustained effort and good faith from all parties to function. But the alternative is the cycle of conflict that nearly gave Shuyin the opening he needed to destroy everything. For Yuna, the resolution of the crisis leaves her at a crossroads. She has spent 2 years searching for someone who resembled Tidus, chasing a hope she barely dared acknowledge even to herself. And while she helped save Spira from annihilation, she is no closer to finding him than when she began. The man in the spheres was Shuyin, not Tidus, the resemblance a coincidence of facial features, rather than indication of any genuine connection. The disappointment could easily be crushing. One more loss added to a collection that already feels too heavy to bear. Yet something about helping Lena and Shuyin find closure has given Yuna new perspective on her own situation. helped her recognize that holding on to the past, however precious, can become its own form of prison. The endings that follow branch based on choices made throughout the journey, relationships cultivated, and opportunities pursued. In all versions, life continues forward, Spira entering an era of uncertain potential, where the old certainties have been replaced by the freedom to determine new paths. The Gullwings disband as formal organization, their members pursuing individual interests now that the crisis binding them together has passed. Paine reunites fully with Nuge, Baralai, and Gipol, the four of them finally able to address the trauma of the Crimson Squad and rebuild relationships on foundations of honesty about what happened in the Den of Woe. Rikku returns to Albed communities, helping her people navigate the challenges of integration into broader Spiran society after centuries of persecution and isolation. Brother remains aboard the Celsius, captaining the airship on various ventures that range from legitimate commerce to schemes that occupy legal grey areas. Buddy and Shinra continue their technical work, pushing the boundaries of what machina technology can achieve, while respecting the lessons learned about the dangers of unchecked ambition. LeBlanc, having finally caught Nuge's attention through her role in saving Spira, finds herself in a peculiar courtship where her theatrical personality clashes entertainingly with his grim pragmatism. Logos and Ormi remain fiercely loyal to their leader while developing their own interests and relationships, no longer defined solely by their membership in her syndicate. But Yuna's ending, her personal resolution, depends on how completely she engaged with the journey. Those who rushed through the story, focused only on major plot points and critical objectives, find Yuna returning to Besaid with a sense of acceptance tinged by melancholy. She has saved Spira twice now, first from Sin and now from Vegnagun, fulfilling every expectation placed upon her and then some. Yet she remains alone, her greatest personal loss unrecovered, and while she finds peace in knowing she made the right choices even when they cost her everything, that peace carries bitter edges. She stands on Besaid's beach watching the sunset, the same beach where she said goodbye to Tidus 2 years ago, and whispers his name to waves that carry it away without response. But for those who pursued every opportunity, who helped everyone who asked for aid, who gathered the scattered spheres, and completed every mission regardless of how tangential, it seemed to the main quest, a different ending awaits. Yuna returns to Besaid having achieved 100% completion, her journey through Spira as thorough as it could possibly be, and she finds the Gullwings have planned a reunion. She travels to the Celsius for what she believes will be a simple gathering, but as she approaches the airship, she hears a voice calling her name. The voice is familiar in ways that make her heart stop, impossible yet unmistakable, and when she turns, Tidus stands there on the deck of the ship, grinning that same carefree grin she remembers from their journey together. The reunion is not immediately explained, the how and why of his return left deliberately ambiguous, but the fact of it proves undeniable. Tidus is here, solid and real, restored by means that might involve the faith's final gift, or the Firefly's response to Yuna's unwavering hope, or simply the universe deciding that some people have earned the happiness they seek. He opens his arms and she runs to him without hesitation, collision and embrace blurring together, and they hold each other while the others cheer and celebrate and give them space to simply exist in the moment. No grand explanations are offered, no detailed justification for how dreams can become real, because sometimes the fact of joy matters more than understanding its mechanisms. The very best ending, reserved for those who achieve perfect completion, extends beyond the Celsius reunion. Yuna and Titus travel together to Zanarkand, the ruins of his home that exist as memorial to a city that was dreamed into existence 1,000 years ago. They climb to the ruins of the Blitzball Stadium where Titus once played, where crowds cheered his name before everything he knew dissolved into revelation that his entire world was collective dream. They sit together among the rubble and look out over the landscape, and Titus asks if this is real, if he is real, if what they have can last, when so much of their previous time together was built on foundations that proved ephemeral. Yuna listens to his uncertainty, hears the fear beneath the question, and responds not with false reassurance, but with acceptance of mystery. She tells him that she does not know if he is dream or reality, if his return will prove permanent or temporary, if the mechanics of his existence can withstand scrutiny from those who insist on clear explanations. What she knows is that he is here now, that they have this moment and potentially many more, and that trying to anxiously guard against future loss would poison whatever time they have together. Love requires risk, requires accepting that everything precious can be taken away, and she has already lost him once. If she must lose him again, at least they will have had this reunion, this chance to be together without the weight of world-ending crises forcing them apart. And if his presence somehow endures, if the impossible becomes permanent, then they will have the future she barely dared to hope for during the 2 years spent searching for any trace of him. They whistle for each other, the same pattern he taught her long ago, and Titus tells her a story. He speaks of darkness and the sensation of dissolution, of his consciousness fragmenting as the dream that sustained him faded. He describes a voice calling him back, persistent and clear, refusing to let him disperse entirely into the collective. He followed that voice through darkness and confusion, through spaces that were neither dream nor reality, until he found himself standing on a beach with water lapping at his feet and sunlight warming his face. He opened his eyes to discover himself in Spira, impossibly but undeniably present, called back by forces he cannot fully explain, but that might include concentrated memory, the faith's gift, or something else entirely beyond mortal comprehension. Whether this explanation represents literal truth or Titus's interpretation of experiences beyond language hardly matters. What matters is that they are together, that the love which survives separation across the boundary between dream and reality has been given another chance, that sometimes hope maintained against all reasonable expectation opens possibilities that cynicism and caution could never access. They stay in Zanarkand's ruins as the sun sets, talking and laughing and simply being present with each other, making up for 2 years of absence with hours that feel both rushed and timeless. When they finally return to the others, when they board the Celsius and rejoin their friends for the flight back to Besaid, they do so with an understanding that their story has not ended, but rather entered a new chapter, whose contents remain to be written. The camera pulls back from their reunion, rising above the Celsius as it flies across Spira's varied landscapes, and the credits begin to roll over images of a world entering a new era. We see Besaid's beaches where children play without fear of sin's return. We see Luca's ports bustling with commerce now freed from the restrictions Yevon imposed. We see Bevelle's towers where New Yevon works to build government structures that serve people rather than maintaining power for elites. We see the Thunder Plains where Machina towers built by the machine faction harness lightning for energy without draining the planet's life force. We see Guadosalam, where the Far Plains entrance remains a place of pilgrimage for those seeking connection with departed loved ones, but no longer a destination approached with fear or dread. Spira persists, damaged by its history but not broken by it, finding ways forward that honor the sacrifices of the past while refusing to be imprisoned by them. The eternal calm, which began with Sin's defeat 2 years ago, continues into an era whose shape remains uncertain, but whose potential feels boundless compared to the constrained cycles that defined the previous millennium. There will be new challenges and conflicts because human societies generate problems regardless of whether ancient monsters threaten their existence. There will be disagreements about how to balance tradition with progress, about what values should guide development, about how to distribute resources and opportunity equitably. But these are problems that emerge from having a future rather than merely surviving the present, and that distinction makes them almost welcome compared to the existential crises that have defined Spiran existence for so long. The final images linger on Yuna and Tidus at the Sphere Hunter reunion, their joy at being together again, palpable as they embrace and reconnect with their companions. The game provides no extended montage of their life together after this moment, leaving their future as open question rather than defined outcome, trusting that what matters has already been shown. Yet even these images of reunion and hope carry undercurrents of deeper meaning when understood in the context of everything that preceded them. Yuna's journey from summoner to sphere hunter to savior, from icon to person, to something that integrates both, demonstrates the difficulty of claiming individual identity when the world insists on treating you as symbol. Her progression mirrors Spira's own struggle to define itself beyond the narratives Yevon imposed, to discover what lies beneath the centuries of accumulated doctrine and tradition. Both Yuna and her world must learn to be themselves, rather than conforming to expectations others have constructed, and both find that process more challenging than any physical battle they could fight. Tidus's return from dissolution, his resurrection through mechanisms that resist clear explanation, speaks to the power of stories and belief to shape reality in ways that transcend mere materialism. In a world where dreams can become tangible enough to contain entire civilizations, where the boundary between consciousness and physical form proves more permeable than conventional understanding suggests, the impossible becomes simply a category for things that have not yet happened rather than things that never can. His presence reminds us that love, when sustained with sufficient intensity and purity, can accomplish what logic insists should remain forever out of reach. Whether his return represents the faith's final gift, the fireflies responding to concentrated memory and longing, or simply the universe's mysterious workings, remains deliberately ambiguous, open to interpretation rather than defined by canon. The parallel between Yuna and Tidus, Lene and Shuyin, makes explicit the thematic core of the entire narrative. Both pairs consist of people who loved each other across boundaries that should have been insurmountable, who refused to accept that circumstances beyond their control could permanently separate them, but where Shuyin's refusal curdled into destructive obsession, where his love became poison that nearly murdered millions, Yuna transformed her grief into determination that remained fundamentally generative rather than destructive. She continued fighting for the world, even when the world seemed to take everything from her, and that choice, that refusal to let loss become excuse for rage, made all the difference. The game's treatment of grief and memory, of how we carry our dead, and what we owe to the past, avoids simple resolution, while offering something approaching wisdom. Shuyin's millennium spent clinging to what he lost demonstrates the danger of allowing grief to become identity, of refusing to move forward because doing so feels like betrayal of what was taken. Yet the game does not suggest that moving forward requires forgetting, or that acceptance means caring less about what was lost. Lenny's memories, preserved in the songstress dress sphere, continue to influence events 1,000 years after her death. Her essence, still capable of reaching the one she loved, even from beyond the boundaries of mortality. She carried forward in crystallized form, while her consciousness moved beyond reach. And when that preserved essence manifested to help Shuyin, it proved strong enough to help him release the hatred that had consumed him. The political dimension of the story, the factional conflicts and ideological disputes that provide much of the plot's forward momentum, speaks to challenges that persist regardless of whether apocalyptic threats loom. How does a society move forward after the collapse of the belief system that structured its existence for a millennium? How do you balance the legitimate need for truth about the past with the equally legitimate need for stability in the present? How do you integrate formerly marginalized groups like the Albed without either demanding they abandon their identity or allowing old prejudices to simply continue unchallenged? These questions lack easy answers, and the game wisely avoids pretending that good intentions and heroic action can resolve them cleanly. The decision to dissolve the Youth League and New Yevon as opposing factions, to create cooperative structures rather than winner-take-all competition, represents aspiration more than achievement. Real political change requires sustained effort across generations, demands more than momentary agreement among leaders who shared a dramatic experience. Whether Nuj, Baralai, and Gipel can maintain their alliance once the immediate crisis has passed, whether their followers will embrace cooperation or continue pursuing factional advantage, whether the structural changes they propose can withstand the inevitable pressures toward regression, all of this remains uncertain. The game acknowledges this uncertainty while suggesting that making the attempt, creating the possibility of something better, matters regardless of whether the outcome lives up to its potential. The Crimson Squad storyline, with its documentation of how friendship fractured into betrayal and how that betrayal stemmed from external manipulation rather than genuine malice, provides microcosm for understanding larger patterns of conflict. Nuj, Baralai, Gipol, and Paine genuinely cared for each other, formed bonds that transcended their diverse backgrounds, yet a single moment of possession and violence shattered their trust so completely that they spent 2 years unable to even speak to each other. Only by understanding what actually happened, by recognizing that Shuyin was responsible for the shooting rather than Nuj acting from his own will, could they begin the process of rebuilding what was broken. The lesson extends beyond their personal situation to broader questions about how conflicts persist when the parties involved lack full understanding of what actually occurred and why. Paine's character arc, from the taciturn warrior who joins the Gullwings without explanation to someone who reconnects with her past and the people who mattered most to her, demonstrates the cost of carrying unresolved trauma. She spent 2 years not understanding why Nuj shot her and their companions, unable to reconcile the person she knew with the person who committed that violence, and that unresolved question poisoned everything else in her life. She could not move forward because she could not make sense of what happened, could not grieve properly when she did not know whether to mourn a friend lost to death or to incomprehensible betrayal. Discovering the truth about Shuyin's possession does not erase the pain of what happened, but it transforms that pain from something meaningless into something explicable, and that shift makes all the difference. The sphere hunting itself, the core gameplay loop that drives exploration and provides structure for the narrative, serves as metaphor for how societies understand themselves through engagement with their past. Each sphere discovered reveals some fragment of history that Yevon suppressed, or that simply faded from collective memory. and the accumulated weight of these fragments reconstructs a picture of Spira that differs dramatically from official narratives. The world that emerges from sphere hunting is more complex and morally ambiguous than the simple story of sin and punishment that Yevon taught, revealing civilizations that rose and fell for reasons having nothing to do with divine judgment, technologies that offered possibility rather than merely inviting catastrophe, and people who made choices that defy easy categorization as righteous or wicked. The game's treatment of machina technology, moving from the previous game's relatively straightforward condemnation of human pride to a more nuanced exploration of tools and their uses, reflects broader maturation in how the narrative approaches moral complexity. Vegnagun represents an extreme case, a weapon so powerful that its existence poses existential threat regardless of who controls it or what intentions guide its use. Yet, the game does not suggest that all machina development inevitably leads to such monstrosities, instead showing how the machine faction's efforts to integrate technology into daily life can ease suffering and expand capability when pursued with wisdom and restraint. The question is not whether to use tools, but rather what values guide their development and application. The Dressphere system itself, beyond its mechanical function, explores questions about identity and performance, about how the roles we adopt shape the people we become. Each Dressphere carries fragments of someone else's consciousness and capabilities, and wearing them means allowing those fragments to influence behavior and perception. Yuna, as Gunner, moves and thinks differently than Yuna as White Mage, not just because of changed combat capabilities, but because she is channeling different aspects of herself, or different influences from the Dressphere's memories. The fluidity this creates, the ability to shift between identities and approaches, mirrors the larger theme of Spira itself, needing to discover what it can become rather than being locked into what it has been. The transformation in Yuna's presentation from the previous game to this one, from the demure summoner in traditional robes to the confident sphere hunter in revealing costume, initially appears jarring or even exploitative. Yet understanding this change within the narrative context reveals it as deliberate choice rather than mere marketing decision. Yuna is actively rejecting the High Summoner identity that threatens to calcify her into symbol, reclaiming agency over how she presents herself, rather than conforming to expectations about how saviors should behave. The playfulness and sexuality of her new appearance represents liberation from constraints that demanded she remain eternally the selfless maiden, allowing her to explore aspects of herself that the pilgrim's path could not accommodate. This reclamation of identity extends to her relationships with others, particularly the developing dynamic between Yuna, Rikku, and Paine. The three of them form a found family that provides emotional anchor throughout the journey, their personalities complementing each other in ways that create balance and support. Rikku brings enthusiasm and optimism that prevent Yuna from becoming lost in melancholy, her determination to help her cousin find joy again, driving much of their early mission structure. Paine offers perspective born of loss and disappointment, her cynicism serving as counterweight to Riku's sometimes naive hopefulness, while her gradual opening up demonstrates that even the most heavily armored hearts can heal when given sufficient reason and patience. The mission structure, with its blend of main story objectives and optional content, creates space for players to determine how thoroughly they want to engage with Spira's transformation. Those who focus solely on critical path content can complete the narrative in relatively short time, experiencing the major plot beats without exploring every corner of the world or helping every person who requests aid. but the game rewards thorough exploration and side quest completion, not merely with mechanical benefits, but with additional story content that enriches understanding of characters and themes. The creature creator system, allowing players to recruit and develop monsters, adds another layer of optional engagement for those who want to explore Spira's ecosystem, beyond merely fighting through it. The various minigames and diversions scattered throughout Spira serve multiple purposes beyond mere padding or distraction. Sphere Break and Gunner's Gauntlet provide challenges that test different skills than standard combat, requiring pattern recognition or rapid decision-making under pressure. The ability to play as the Gullwings in actual blitzball matches, rather than merely watching, gives players direct experience of the sport that featured so prominently in Tidus's story. Even smaller diversions like the Gunner's Gauntlet training sequences or the various treasure hunt missions contribute to making Spira feel like a place where life continues in forms both mundane and extraordinary, where not everything revolves around the central crisis, even as that crisis shapes context for all activities. The Comsphere network, allowing players to observe events unfolding across Spira, even when not directly participating, adds voyeuristic dimension that supports the game's themes about observation and documentation. Watching different locations through the Comspheres reveals how ordinary people are adapting to the eternal calm, shows the small dramas and conflicts that define daily life, regardless of whether heroes are saving the world. The feature also creates mechanical incentive to periodically check in on locations between major story missions, as new content appears based on progression and previous choices, rewarding attention to the world beyond immediate quest objectives. The musical score, composed by Noriko Matsueda and Takahashi Hamauzu, rather than returning composer Nobuo Uematsu, maintains emotional continuity with the previous game, while introducing new themes that reflect Spira's transformed circumstances. 1,000 Words, performed during the critical Thunder Plains concert, serves as spiritual successor to Hymn of the Faith from the previous game, a song that carries narrative weight and emotional resonance beyond its function as background music. The theme encapsulates Lene and Shuyin's tragedy, while simultaneously expressing Yuna's own feelings about loss and hope, creating multi-layered meaning that enriches every scene in which it appears. The contrast between the melancholic Japanese version and the more pop-oriented English version gives the song different emotional registers depending on which localization players experience. The battle themes maintain energy and urgency while incorporating more modern instrumentation that reflects Spira's movement toward embracing technology previously forbidden. The victorious fanfare that plays after successful encounters retains the triumphant quality expected from the series, while adding flourishes that make it distinct from previous iterations. Character themes, when they appear, call back to motifs from the previous game, while evolving them to reflect how those characters have changed in the intervening 2 years. The music, like everything else in the game, balances continuity with transformation, honoring what came before while establishing its own identity. The visual presentation, utilizing the PlayStation 2's capabilities more fully than the previous game, due to additional years of development experience, creates a Spira that feels simultaneously familiar and transformed. Locations from the previous game return, but show signs of the changes sweeping through society. Temples repurposed for secular use, roads bustling with machina vehicles, settlements expanding beyond their previous boundaries. New locations like Chateau Leblanc and the Celsius interior provide fresh environments that reflect the game's different tone and priorities. The character models, while maintaining the general aesthetic of the previous game, feature more detailed textures and animation that convey personality through movement and expression. The full-motion video sequences, while less frequent than in the previous game due to different narrative structure, deploy spectacle when it serves the story. The Thunder Plains concert, Vegnagun's assembly in the Far Plains depths, Len and Shuyan's final farewell. Each of these receives cinematic treatment that emphasizes their emotional and narrative importance. The decision to render most content using in-engine graphics rather than pre-rendered video creates greater consistency in presentation while allowing for more seamless transitions between gameplay and cutscene. The trade-off sacrifices some visual fidelity compared to pre-rendered sequences, but gains flexibility in how scenes can be constructed and modified. The localization effort, translating not just dialogue, but cultural concepts and tonal nuances from Japanese to English, faces challenges inherent in adapting a sequel that builds on foundations established in the previous game. References to events and relationships from the first game require players to understand context that may not be immediately apparent to those jumping in without prior experience. The decision to include various gags and pop culture references that were not present in the original Japanese version creates a somewhat different tonal experience between regions, with the English version leaning more heavily into comedy at times than the Japanese original intended. These choices, while controversial among purists, serve to make the game feel more accessible to Western audiences unfamiliar with Japanese linguistic and cultural nuances. The gender dynamics of the game, featuring a predominantly female cast operating with significant autonomy and agency, mark notable departure from typical action RPG conventions of the era. Yuna, Rikku, and Paine drive the narrative without requiring male characters to validate their choices or rescue them from consequences. When male characters like Brother or the faction leaders appear, they serve supporting roles rather than dominating the story, and the game never suggests that the women are incomplete without romantic partnerships or male guidance. Even the romantic element with Tidus, when he returns in the perfect ending, is framed as reunion between equals rather than Maiden finally being rescued by her prince. LeBlanc, despite her initial presentation as comic relief antagonist, receives surprising depth and complexity as her motivations are revealed. Her unrequited feelings for Nuge, her creation of the Syndicate as found family for those who did not fit elsewhere, her genuine competence beneath the theatrical presentation, all of these complicate simple dismissal of her as mere buffoon. The evolving relationship between the Gullwings and the Syndicate, from rivalry to grudging respect to eventual cooperation, demonstrates how circumstances can transform enemies into allies when larger threats demand setting aside smaller conflicts. By the end, LeBlanc and her lieutenants feel like part of the extended family rather than external antagonists, their quirks endearing rather than merely annoying. The game's treatment of grief and mourning, particularly Yuna's processing of Tidus's loss, avoids the trap of suggesting that moving forward requires forgetting, or that finding new purpose somehow betrays the dead. Yuna never stops loving Tidus, never decides that she was foolish to care so deeply about someone she knew could not last. Yet she also does not allow that love to become prison that prevents her from living. She continues making choices, forming relationships, engaging with the world. And this continued engagement is what ultimately creates the conditions for Tidus's return, rather than passive mourning that changes nothing. The perfect ending's message is not that waiting patiently guarantees reward, but rather that living fully while carrying loss can sometimes open possibilities that withdrawal and stasis could never achieve. The faith's role in Tidus's resurrection remains deliberately ambiguous, hinted at, but never definitively explained, allowing players to interpret based on their own inclinations. Some might see it as literal divine intervention, the faith's final gift to Yuna, in thanks for freeing them from their eternal dream-sustaining duty. Others might interpret it as metaphorical representation of how memory and love can maintain the essence of those we have lost, keeping them alive in ways that transcend mere nostalgia. The game's refusal to provide explicit answers respects player intelligence, while acknowledging that some mysteries benefit from remaining unresolved, that the fact of joy matters more than fully comprehending its mechanisms. The various endings available depending on completion percentage create interesting commentary on effort and reward, suggesting that the universe responds to thoroughness and care. Those who rush through main objectives, ignoring optional content and bypassing opportunities to help others, receive the functional ending where Shuyin is defeated and Spira is saved, but Yuna remains alone. It is not a punishment exactly, but rather a natural consequence of partial engagement, the universe providing what was earned through the level of investment demonstrated. The perfect ending, with Tidus's return and their reunion in Zanarkand, becomes available only to those who explored every corner, helped everyone who needed aid, engaged with Spira fully, rather than treating it as mere obstacle between them and final boss. The message is that wholehearted engagement with the world yields richer rewards than mere instrumental interaction, motivated by desire to reach conclusion. This design philosophy extends to the game's broader structure, which de-emphasizes linear narrative progression in favor of emergent storytelling through player choice and exploration. The mission-based format allows for significant flexibility in approach, with players determining not just the order of objectives, but also which opportunities to pursue and which to let pass. The faction choice regarding the awesome sphere creates branching narrative paths that affect available content and character relationships for the remainder of the game. Even smaller choices, like whether to support particular characters' requests or how thoroughly to explore optional dungeons, accumulate into overall experience that can differ substantially between playthroughs. The new Game Plus functionality, allowing players to carry over certain progress elements when beginning another playthrough, encourages experiencing the game multiple times to explore different choices and gather content that might have been missed initially. The creature creator expands significantly in repeat playthroughs, with additional creatures and customization options becoming available to those willing to invest time in the system. The various side stories and character arcs reveal different dimensions when approached with knowledge of how they connect to larger narrative, creating satisfaction in noticing details and connections that were not apparent during initial experience. The game's commercial and critical reception proved more mixed than its predecessor's universal acclaim, with some praising the freedom and experimentation it brought to the series, while others criticized its departure from the tone and structure that made the first game so beloved. The mission-based format felt liberating to players who appreciated non-linear exploration, but directionless to those who preferred tighter narrative focus. The lighter tone and increased fan service alienated some who wanted continuation of the previous game's more serious approach, while delighting others who appreciated seeing Yuna in different contexts than perpetual tragedy. The combat system's emphasis on rapid job changing rewarded adaptability, but frustrated those who preferred defined character roles and party dynamics. In retrospect, Final Fantasy X-2 occupies unusual position in the series' legacy as a direct sequel that takes significant risks with tone and structure, that chooses to explore what happens after saving the world, rather than simply presenting another world-ending crisis requiring identical solutions. Its willingness to show that peace brings its own challenges, that conflicts emerge from politics and ideology rather than merely external monsters, that heroes must determine who they are when the immediate crisis has passed, and expectations no longer provide clear guidance. All of this demonstrates ambition that conventional sequel would likely avoid. Whether the execution fully realizes that ambition remains debatable, but the attempt itself deserves acknowledgement as something more interesting than playing it safe. The game's exploration of female friendship and found family, its presentation of women supporting each other through transformation and crisis, its depiction of how relationships change as people grow and circumstances evolve, all of this contributes elements rarely centered in action RPGs of the era. Yuna, Rikku, and Paine's bond does not require romantic subplot or male characters facilitating their emotional growth. They talk through problems, disagree about approaches, support each other's choices, even when they might make different ones themselves, and model healthy relationship dynamics that value both individuality and connection. Their willingness to let each other change, to not demand that anyone remain frozen in whatever version of themselves proved most comfortable for others, demonstrates maturity often lacking in stories about friendship. The theme of performance and authenticity, woven throughout via the Dressphere system, and Yuna's struggle with her High Summoner identity, raises questions about the relationship between who we are and who we present ourselves as being. Each Dressphere involves Yuna adopting a role, performing a specific identity with its associated capabilities and limitations. Yet these performances are not simply false masks hiding true self, but rather ways of accessing different aspects of her potential, different skills and approaches that exist within her capacity, even if they do not align with how others expect her to behave. The game suggests that authenticity is not about identifying some core essential self that exists independent of context, but rather about genuine engagement with whatever roles circumstances require, bringing sincerity to performance rather than allowing performance to replace sincerity. Shuyin's tragedy, beyond the obvious elements of lost love and death too soon, includes the dimension of being trapped in a single moment and single emotion for a millennium. He cannot move beyond the anguish of losing Lene because he lacks access to new experiences and relationships that might gradually soften grief through incorporation of other emotions and memories. He becomes his grief in ways that erase everything else he might have been, reducing a complex person to single defining trauma. Only Lene's return and her willingness to help him recognize what he has become allows him to finally release the moment that has held him captive, to accept that loving her does not require remaining eternally in the worst moment they shared, that moving forward dishonors her memory only if he transforms their love into excuse for atrocity. The contrast between Yuna's approach to losing Tidus and Shuyin's response to losing Lene provides the moral and emotional center of the entire narrative. Both loved deeply, both lost the person who mattered most, both faced the question of how to continue when the future they imagined became impossible. Yuna chose to keep living, to keep connecting with others, to keep fighting for a world that took from her the one she loved most. Shuyin chose to nurse his rage, to let hatred become his entire existence, to decide that if he could not have happiness, then no one deserved the possibility. The game's judgment about which response represents wisdom is clear, but it avoids suggesting that Yuna's choice was easy, or that her suffering was somehow less than Shuyin's, merely because she did not let it consume her. The political resolution, with the three factions agreeing to dissolve their opposition and work cooperatively, risks feeling too neat, too convenient a solution to conflicts that the game spent considerable time establishing as deeply rooted. Yet the resolution is presented not as permanent achievement, but as tentative beginning, an agreement to try something different rather than guarantee that difference will persist against inevitable pressures. The game acknowledges through Nuge, Baralai, and Gippel's dialogue that maintaining cooperation will require sustained effort, that structures alone cannot ensure good faith when interests diverge, that their personal experiences do not automatically translate to their followers sharing their perspective. The ending is hopeful without being naive, suggesting possibility rather than inevitability. The environmental themes present in the previous game continue, but in different form, less about preventing immediate catastrophe and more about building sustainable approach to civilization in the catastrophe's absence. The machine factions work to integrate machina in ways that do not repeat the mistakes of the ancient civilizations that sin was supposedly created to punish, demonstrates that technology itself is not villain, but rather how technology is deployed and to what ends. The harvesting of lightning at Thunder Plains, using natural phenomena for power rather than draining the planet's spiritual essence, represents the kind of innovation that could allow Spira to develop without repeating the cycles that led to previous collapses. Whether this wisdom will persist or whether new generations will succumb to the same temptations that destroyed their predecessors remains open question that the game wisely declines to answer definitively. The various locations throughout Spira show different stages of adaptation to the eternal calm, with some embracing change eagerly and others clinging to familiar patterns despite their obsolescence. Kilika's rebuilding after Sin's attack shows both physical reconstruction and social transformation, with new buildings rising alongside new relationships between formerly segregated groups. Luca's continued role as commercial and entertainment hub demonstrates how some aspects of society persist regardless of broader upheavals, that people's need for distraction and connection survives even dramatic political and spiritual reorganization. Besaid's slower pace of change reflects both geographic isolation and cultural conservatism, the village remaining recognizable even as subtle shifts indicate that nowhere escapes the transformations sweeping through Spira. The Celsius itself, the airship that serves as the Gullwings' mobile headquarters, represents the game's themes in microcosm. It is a space of freedom and possibility, allowing rapid travel between locations that would take weeks or months to reach by conventional means. Its crew consists of misfits and outcasts who have found purpose and family through their association, united not by shared backgrounds, but by common commitment to exploration and discovery. The ship's transformation from military vessel to civilian transport mirrors Spira's broader movement from organization around conflict to exploration of peacetime possibilities, and its gradual accumulation of character through the journey, from the spheres gathered to the creatures recruited to the memories created, shows how spaces become meaningful through the experiences they contain, rather than merely their physical attributes. The game's difficulty balancing, allowing players to make combat as challenging or straightforward as desired through dress sphere selection and level management, creates accessibility while preserving depth for those seeking it. The ability to overlevel through grinding makes even the most difficult encounters manageable for players prioritizing narrative over mechanical challenge, while self-imposed restrictions or pursuit of perfect strategies provides depth for those wanting to fully explore the combat system's possibilities. The creature creator adds another dimension of complexity for players interested in optimizing their recruited monsters, while those uninterested in the system can largely ignore it without compromising their ability to complete main content. The boss encounters themselves range from straightforward damage races to complex encounters requiring specific strategies or dress sphere combinations. Shuyin's multiple forms during the final battle test different approaches, forcing adaptation as his tactics evolve and requiring players to utilize the full breadth of dress sphere capabilities rather than relying on single preferred configuration. The optional super bosses scattered through the game provide extreme challenges that require mastery of systems beyond what the main story demands, rewarding those willing to experiment and optimize while not gating story content behind mechanical skill walls. The interconnection of gameplay systems, with sphere hunting providing money for purchasing dress spheres and garment grids, which in turn enable more effective combat and exploration, which opens access to new spheres and missions, creates self-reinforcing cycle that encourages thorough engagement. The mission-based structure means that any given objective might reward multiple types of progress, from narrative advancement to party strengthening to unlocking new areas or features. This design respects player time by avoiding purely repetitive grinding while still offering depth for those wanting to fully develop their capabilities and explore every system. As the story concludes, as the final images fade and the credits complete their role, what lingers is not the specifics of plot resolution or the mechanical satisfactions of combat mastered, but rather the emotional journey of a young woman learning to live beyond the role that defined her. Yuna's transformation from the High Summoner frozen in moment of sacrifice to a person moving forward with agency and purpose represents victory more meaningful than defeating any villain. Her ability to carry Tidus's memory without being paralyzed by his loss, to form new relationships without betraying old ones, to find purpose beyond constant crisis and self-sacrifice, demonstrates that saving the world does not require sacrificing yourself, that you can be both hero and human, rather than choosing between them. The game's ultimate message, woven through every aspect from narrative to mechanics to thematic exploration, suggests that healing requires both honoring the past and refusing to be imprisoned by it. Spira cannot move forward by pretending Yevon never existed, or that the 1,000 years under its doctrine were merely wasted time. Too much of Spiran identity is bound up in those teachings. Too many people have shaped their lives around beliefs that cannot simply be discarded without leaving void that might prove even more dangerous than the flawed structures they replace. But moving forward also requires recognizing when traditions have become chains, when honoring the past transforms into refusing the present and future any space to develop independently. The personal and political operate as reflections of each other throughout, with Yuna's individual journey toward claiming identity beyond High Summoner, mirroring Spira's collective struggle to define itself beyond Yevon's frameworks. Both must determine what to keep and what to release, what represents genuine wisdom worth preserving, and what amounts to accumulated superstition or self-serving doctrine masquerading as sacred truth. Both must learn to live with ambiguity and uncertainty, accepting that not every question has clear answer, and that sometimes the best available path forward involves risk and trust rather than guaranteed safety. The story ultimately celebrates the courage required to continue when continuation offers no certainty, to love when love has already cost you everything, to hope when every rational calculation suggests hope is naive fantasy. Yuna searches for Tidus across 2 years, despite knowing he dissolved into fireflies, despite understanding that dreams should not become real when their dreaming ends. She maintains that search, not because she has secret knowledge guaranteeing success, but because the alternative, accepting his permanent loss without exhausting every possibility however remote, would mean giving up on the best thing she ever found before she absolutely must. That refusal to surrender hope prematurely, that willingness to risk disappointment for the possibility of joy, creates the conditions that allow his return when everything suggested return should be impossible. Perhaps that is the final lesson the game offers, that sometimes the universe rewards not the cynics who protected themselves from disappointment by refusing to hope, but rather those who hoped fully while understanding that hope offers no guarantees. That wholehearted engagement with life despite its capacity for inflicting loss represents the only approach that occasionally yields miracles, while cautious withdrawal guarantees only that miracles will pass you by, that the courage to continue loving, connecting, risking, even after everything has already been taken from you once, distinguishes those who merely survive from those who truly live. If you enjoyed this deep exploration into Final Fantasy X-2's story, consider leaving a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to stay connected as we continue uncovering the forgotten corners of role-playing game lore and the stories that shape the medium. Until next time, thank you for joining me on this journey through Spira's transformation from eternal suffering to uncertain hope, from the weight of tradition to the possibilities of change, and from the high summoner's burden to a sphere hunter's freedom.